Quite apart from those who left for active service, there were a great many who remained in Oxford, but they weren't idle. For one thing, they were helping with a very key part of the war effort. Because of the German submarine blockade, there were food shortages. And that meant that about 20 acres of Port Meadow to the north of Oxford University Press was put under cultivation to grow agricultural produce. And as one of the printers at the press put it, these allotments on Port Meadow kept me in parsnips while U-boats had sunk my lunch. And the growing of vegetables became a very popular pastime for the men at the press. It obviously contributed produce to the local markets, but it continued after the war into a very popular flower and fruit and vegetable show, which became really a summer fete in the main quadrangle of the press. Quite apart from cultivation, though, during the war, pressmen were also taking part in military preparations on a more minor scale. We forget now, being lucky enough to live in a very peaceful culture, that many of the older men working at the press had military experience. They remembered the Boer War. Some of them had actually served in it. And so those older men started a kind of volunteer unit here at the press to train men who had never fired a rifle before, the basics of that skill, and also to draw younger apprentices into a basic military discipline. I think in a very Dad's Army kind of way, they saw themselves really as being the ditch of last resistance if the Kaiser's troops had invaded. But in the event, this really proved to be a very valuable training ground for people who did go on active service. And of course, its morale was incalculable. At a time when so many people had left the press, when so many things were changing, this small military unit in the business really held people's hopes and aspirations together in a very worthwhile way. Of course, it wasn't the only unit that was in operation at the press either. Since the 1830s, the press had had its own fire brigade. This may sound very strange to 21st century ears, but before the local council set up a city brigade, all of the colleges and the major industries in the city had their own in-house fire units to tackle blazes on the premises, to deal with industrial accidents. And in wartime, these units came into their own. They were not Toy Town brigades. They had been drilled, they had been trained, they could tackle serious blazes, and they knew how to save lives. And during the First World War, with the threat of Zeppelin attacks on the city, they became a key part of the war effort here at home.